All right, let's get right into it. For what, almost a century now, we've had one main way of judging how a country is doing. Money. Simple as that. But what if we've been measuring the wrong thing this entire time? Today, we're going to dig into a pretty radical idea that came out of a tiny Himalayan kingdom, an idea that challenges our entire definition of what progress even means.
You know, this isn't a new debate. This quote from Robert F. Kennedy way back in 1968 just nails the problem perfectly. He argued that our main yardstick for success, the gross national product, it adds up everything except the very things that make life worth living. And that question, it's just been hanging in the air for decades.
So the world kind of just settled on GDP as its official scorecard. And look, economists knew happiness was the ultimate goal, but it just seemed too fuzzy, right? Too hard to pin down and measure. So they used a stand-in, economic output. The logic was pretty straightforward. A richer country has to mean a better life for its people. But is that really true?
And then, 1972 rolls around, and everything gets turned on its head. During his coronation, the new young king of Bhutan gets a question from a journalist about his country's tiny economy, and his response was, well, it was a bombshell. He just declared that gross national happiness is more important than gross national product. Just like that, he planted the seed for a whole new way of thinking.
The core idea, as Bhutan's prime minister later put it, is actually beautifully simple. Why are we so obsessed with measuring the means to an end, which is money, when we could be trying to measure the end goal itself, happiness, right? We all work to earn money, hoping it'll make us happy. So why not just focus our policies directly on well-being? So let's dig in. What's the actual problem with using GDP as our main guide? Well, when you start to look a little closer, the whole model starts to show some really serious cracks. It turns out that more doesn't always equal merrier.
GDP has these huge blind spots. It doesn't count any of the unpaid work that's absolutely vital for society, like raising a child or volunteering your time. And what's worse, it actually counts negative things as positives. Think about it. A hurricane that forces a community to spend billions rebuilding, that makes GDP go up. A giant oil spill that costs a fortune to clean up, also a boost to GDP. It's wild. And it tells us absolutely nothing about whether that wealth is shared fairly or if we even have any free time to enjoy our lives.
This whole disconnect led to this really fascinating discovery back in 1974, and it's called the Easterlin Paradox. Here's what it found, and it's a bit of a mind-bender. Within a country, richer people are generally happier than poorer people. Makes sense. But when you compare countries to each other, richer countries aren't always happier than poorer ones. And maybe the weirdest part, as a country gets richer and richer over time, its overall happiness level just flatlines.
And this chart of the United States just illustrates the paradox perfectly. Look at this. For 50 years, from 46 to 96, real income per person is just shooting for the moon. It skyrockets. But the percentage of people who told surveyors they were very happy, it went absolutely nowhere. It stayed completely flat. All that extra money didn't seem to buy even an ounce more happiness.
There's this one economic journalist who put it perfectly with this analogy. He said, for most of human history, you had these two birds, more and merrier, and they sat on the same branch. Making a country richer also made its people happier. But somewhere along the line, in our modern world, the merrier bird seems to have flown away to build its own nest somewhere else.
So what is going on here? Well, a big part of it is just how our brains are wired. Check this out. In a Harvard survey, about half the people chose to make $50,000 a year in a world where the average salary was $25,000, rather than make $100,000 a year in a world where the average was $200,000. Let that sink in. People preferred to be poor in absolute terms as long as they were richer than their neighbors. It shows our happiness is so often about relative status, not just absolute wealth, and that's a game GDP just can't measure.
Okay, so if GDP is a flawed guide, what's the alternative? Let's head back to Bhutan and see how they actually built their model, which, as you'll see, rests on a completely different foundation.
So Bhutan's gross national happiness is built on these 4 pillars. And you'll notice right away, economic development is only one piece of the puzzle. And even then, it has to be equitable and sustainable. It's balanced against protecting the environment, preserving culture, and making sure the government is actually working for the people. It's a much more holistic vision of success. But of course, an idea this big, this radical, it's not going to go unchallenged. The concept of GNH sparked this huge, intense debate.
Is this a real workable alternative for the world, or is it just wishful thinking? And let's be really clear here. GNH is not a perfect model. As it started getting attention on the world stage, it also began to face some very tough, very legitimate criticisms.
So the critics start chiming in, right? They're saying, hey, hang on a minute. Happiness is subjective, and it changes from moment to moment. How can you base a national policy on that? They argue that maybe this only works in a tiny, homogeneous Buddhist nation like Bhutan. And here's the most worrying part. Some feared that a government that gets to define happiness could use it as a cover for some pretty repressive policies.
And that fear, it became a painful reality for a lot of people. In the name of preserving its national culture, which is one of the pillars of GNH, remember, the Bhutanese government deported over 100,000 ethnic Nepalese people in the early 90s. For them, the policy didn't lead to happiness, but to what one of their leaders called gross national sorrow. It's a really dark chapter in this story.
Meanwhile, as all this is happening, another group of economists are basically saying, hold on, maybe we wrote off GDP a little too fast. They started pushing back.
A really big study by two economists, Stevenson and Wolfers, re-examined all the global data, and what they found completely flipped the Esolen paradox on its head. Their analysis showed a clear, strong, and consistent link. The wealthier a country is, the higher its life satisfaction. And there was no leveling off point. The line just kept going up.
So this is really the heart of the debate, right here. We are left with two credible, data-driven, and completely contradictory conclusions. One side says, hey, after a certain point, more money doesn't buy more happiness. The other side says, actually, yes, it does, and there's no limit. More money is always linked to more life satisfaction.
So where does that leave us? With two completely opposite, data-backed conclusions? This deep conflict suggests that maybe, just maybe, we're asking the wrong question. Maybe the debate isn't about picking which outcome to maximize, happiness or money. Maybe the real focus should be somewhere else entirely.
This is where thinkers like the Nobel Prize winner Amartya Sen come in and offer a third path. He argued that the goal of a good society shouldn't be to make people happy or rich. Instead, the goal should be to make people free, to build a society where every single person has the real capability, the education, the health, the opportunity to choose and create the life that they value for themselves.
There's a beautiful old quote from the poet William Cowper that gets at this idea perfectly. A slave might be well-fed and contented, but they are missing the most essential element of a good life, freedom. And that freedom has a profound value all on its own. The goal, then, isn't just contentment, it's liberty.
And you know, that really brings us to the ultimate legacy of gross national happiness. Whether it's the perfect metric or not, its greatest contribution may have simply been starting this vital worldwide conversation. It forced everyone, from academics to world leaders, to stop and ask a really fundamental question. What are we actually trying to achieve as a society?
With its bold idea, Bhutan took the road less traveled. And whether that particular path turns out to be the right one for everyone or not, it has forced all of us to look up from the well-worn road of GDP and seriously question which path we should be on. And that, right there, has made all the difference.